Car with headlights off parks and waits for me.
Last night I was taking a ride. I like walking or riding at night as there's less noise and little traffic. It's usually peaceful. This time I was headed home around 2 a.m. There's a stretch of street about 2 blocks long, which runs on county land between the borders of two cities. As such, it has no street lights. I always watch for cars here, and the shoulders are narrow. At the end of the street towards my home, it hits an intersection where you can either curve gently left on the same street or take a blind sharp right turn. There is a street light just around the curve to the left, so that intersection has a bit of background light as you approach. I was about 2/3 of the way along when I heard the rushing sound of a car from behind me. But when I looked back, I didn't see one. I looked again just in time to see a thankfully light-colored car coming my way, with no lights on whatsoever. I got out of the way and they drove past at around 25 to 30, normal speed for the street. No running or taillights either. As they passed, I shouted, "Turn on your lights." At the end of the street, I saw them take a right turn. I paused and thought, if they're driving around blacked out, maybe they're up to trouble. And just maybe they took that turn in order to head back this way. At first, I just moved well off the road. On the right, there's a large house which sits on the corner. Its front side faces the street off that blind turn. It had a bright floodlight on the back. I immediately decided that the risk of getting caught by a homeowner might be an okay risk to take in this case. So I pulled around the right side of the house into their side yard, which was dark. I laid my bike down on the grass and moved until I couldn't be seen from the street I'd been on, and waited. I heard 2 car doors shut and a few gravel crunches and wondered if they'd actually parked around the corner. I walked around a bit further until I could see around the front, and a hedge blocked my view. I waited a few minutes in silence, then heard crunch, 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 and 2 doors shutting. Red lights came on the other side of the hedge, and the car pulled back towards the intersection. Seems they did pull a U-turn, park, get out and wait, presumably for me to come around the corner. I didn't know whether they'd gone straight or turned left and gone back the way they came, so I moved until I could see the street I'd been on. A few moments later, the car drove by very slowly, headlights on. I gave them several minutes to get all the way down, walked out to make sure they were gone, then rode home. Whatever they planned to do, from scare me to rob me to beat me, I thought it'd be best if I didn't find out. I guess they assumed I'd ride on up there and they'd pop out. My area is on the lower to middle end crime-wise, with most of it being vandalism, mail theft, gas siphoning, etc. But that's not to say that there aren't assholes wandering around, up to no good. But it took me a few moments in this case to go, wait a minute, if they're driving around with no lights at night, maybe they're not just being stupid today. Maybe they're doing it intentionally.
Smiley Guy with his frozen dog.
I'm new to Reddit and this is my first post, but I've been reading these stories for the past few days and thought I could share one of my own. Hopefully it's creepy enough for you guys. It sure as hell was for me. This happened about a year ago. I was 22 and in my final year of college. I'd been living in a loft apartment that was on the third floor of a house. Two other couples lived in the apartment below me. I lived just off campus in what's called a cusp neighborhood, which is basically a safer, just more family-oriented area, which was a mix of some college students as well as old people and families. Since my apartment was on the third floor, the door I used was around back with 2 flights of stairs going up to my apartment door. Also, my bedroom was at the front of the house with 2 big windows that faced the street. One night I was coming back from working on my thesis with a classmate at her apartment. It was late, around midnight, and I drove down my street to find parking. I lived in a cul-de-sac with a dead end, so I turned around when I didn't see any parking and decided to park on the main street that ran perpendicular to mine. I had done this many times before and walked to my apartment late at night on multiple occasions and always felt safe. After I got out of the car and pulled my 2 heavy bags out, I noticed a man standing in the street where mine began. He was about 40 feet away and his face was sort of covered by shadow, but he was facing me and I could tell he was staring at me. He seemed to be in his 30s, was wearing regular looking clothing, and had a dog that looked to be kind of a beagle next to him. Normally I would just shrug it off as some guy walking his dog. No biggie. But I still had one of those really bad gut feelings something was up with this guy, and here's why. First of all, he pretty much seemed to appear out of nowhere. I had been driving down my street and didn't see anyone, nor did I see anyone up or down the street I parked on, and I was actively looking around to find a parking space, so I would have seen if someone was walking down the street. Second, he is just standing there facing me, and if he were walking his dog, shouldn't he be doing the obvious, like walking? Then, the last thing, that to me was the creepiest, was that he was standing in the middle of the street, not by one of the sidewalks on either side, but smack in the middle, like he was trying to block the street. I fumbled for my keys to lock my car and noticed him still standing there staring. I knew I had to walk by him to get to my apartment, so I was starting to get pretty creeped out at this point. Not to mention his dog was just as frozen as he was, not moving and also just staring at me. So I sort of half smiled in his direction and said, "Hello," pretty loudly, trying to show confidence that I wasn't scared of him. I started walking as far to the left side of the street as I could, the side that my house was on, making sure my house key was ready to go and lock the door quickly. My house was 4 houses down from the top of the street, and there's a small street lamp right in front of my neighbor's house that kept it from being totally dark. The man hadn't said anything in return, and I was avoiding eye contact, trying to look straight ahead. Something possessed me to glance at him, and I wish I hadn't. When I looked to my right, he was grinning at me, with this really sinister-looking grin. The only thing moving was his head as he followed me. I snapped my head back and increased my speed, trying to mentally locate where my phone was in my bag if I had to call 911. When I got to my house, I turned left to take the little path leading to where my door was and quickly glanced back to see if he was following me. He was directly under my neighbor's street lamp, like a spotlight, about 15 feet from me, just standing there with his frozen dog, still staring and still smiling. At this point, I just bolted to my door. It was not well lit by any means, and I couldn't see whether or not he was going to follow me to the door. I unlocked the door as fast as I could, slammed it behind me, and deadbolted it shut. I turned off the stair light because I didn't want him to see me through the window at the second floor landing and know which floor I lived on. I fumbled up the stairs to my apartment door, unlocked that, and turned off all the lights in my apartment. I crept into my bedroom. Thank God I'd drawn the blinds before I'd left, and made a little hole in them with my fingers to look outside. Much to my horror, he was standing in the middle of the street again, directly in front of my house, looking up at my window, still smiling, and this time waving. I freaked out and grabbed my phone from my bag and called my dad. Probably should have called the police in hindsight. I was in hysterics telling him what was happening. He told me to calm down, make sure all my doors and windows were locked, and to call campus PD. I called the campus police and this time much more calmly explained my ordeal. By this time I felt safe enough to look out the window again, and didn't see him. They eventually came after about a half hour, took my statement, and searched for the guy, who they of course never found. They did say, however, that there were boot prints in the dirt by my back door, as well as the same prints in the side garden of my neighbors, who lived on the first floor. The garden was on the other side of my house, right under one of their windows. Needless to say, I made sure both of my first and second floor neighbors were warned about this creep. I think the thing that creeps me out most is that I never saw him actually walk anywhere. It seemed like he just appeared. I never heard footsteps or any indication he'd moved closer to me, and every time I saw him, he was just standing there with his dog, who wasn't moving either. Not a sound from either of them. That smile still gives me the shivers. So, creepy smiley guy with your frozen dog, let's never fucking meet again.